two philosophical camps could pop up around either advancing forms of humans or advancing forms of machines. And so would you invest in posthumanism and advancing the species that comes after humans, or transhumanism, which means actually augmenting humans as you have today?
I was ruminating, and I think I finally got over this at the age of 35. I haven't been ruminating these last couple months. I don't know if that means my life is complete, but I was ruminating heavily about the future of advanced economies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you remember what you were thinking about. Also, I know it was a while ago. It's tangentially related, maybe. Is it something AR, VR? Do you remember?
Yeah, highly likely that I would have had thoughts on AR and VR back in August 2023. I think that's something I continue to think about now, um, just through different lenses, like thinking about digital space, thinking about who could be the most exciting players in this area, and then also thinking about what that's going to mean for the human experience. So, how we live our lives day to day, where we participate in activities in, what those kinds of spaces look like. Those are all kind of things that I spend time thinking about.
Yeah, and it's cool too because like I wasn't super focused on the interface. God, can you
Mm.
believe this is one of the interfaces? Uh, interface.
Hmm.
But you made me think about the interface in a way that I honestly I like feel empowered by. So thank you. And you know, if you're like meeting my listeners for the first time, I think you're like one of the core people that's going to be in this wave of influence, like the future leaders in the technology industry.
That's
And
very
so,
generous, but thank
oh,
you.
please. Yeah, it's not generous, right? You're in DC, you're doing the consulting thing, you're working on practical stuff, and then you write theoretically and philosophically. And you studied an interdisciplinary kind of situation too, right? Cognitive science.
Yes, study cognitive science. So that at my school was a combination of computer science, psychology, philosophy, linguistics, and neuroscience.
Yeah,
Um,
you're being generous. So that proves my point. But so to that situation, you know, I was thinking like very systematically about economics and politics
mhm.
and large distributed enterprise systems. You gave me like a much more like localized way to think about like humans, brains, techno optimism. Are you still a techno optimist after what's gone on these last 6 months or so since we last talked?
Yeah, I think so. I think I will always continue to believe that technology can do good things for humans. I don't always agree with how we execute on that, but I think fundamentally technological progress can be a good thing. And I think we just need to be really thoughtful about how to use that power correctly.
And are you still like you said you still think about hardware problems or what's your perspective on the interface? Like the Apple device came out and you know, I mean like this wasn't here 6 months ago. Like what is your perspective on the interface in general and just this whole idea that we're discussing here?
Yeah, I think zooming out a little bit, I have a more macro theory about interfaces and how they continue to evolve, which I think is now quite commonly adopted as we think about technology, which is um, as we progress and get better at designing hardware, it gets closer to our bodies. So we might have started with large mainframe computers and then desktops, then we had laptops, which sat on our laps. And now we have wearables, which sit on our wrists and don't leave. It's not
Yeah.
something we use, it kind of just sits there. We're moving into the Vision Pro, which right now is a heavier thing that is sometimes painful to wear. But
Yeah.
I'm sure on like V6 of that, it'll be lightweight, portable, easy to carry around. And then you're pretty much living in virtual spaces as much as you would
Wow.
like. And then I think
Yeah.
the step after that becomes neural interfaces and brain computer interfaces and those kinds of things. So I think we're at an exciting time in that inflection where we get to decide how to integrate technology with our bodies and whether we should at all.
Okay. Now, do you think we actually get to decide?
Well, I like to think we do. I think that we have these incentive structures that are pushing us towards certain types of innovation, but we have the power to decide whether or not we want to keep those incentive structures in place.
I was kind of thinking about this, like Apple gets us locked into their device ecosystem.
Mhm.
Uh, and I mean, it sits outside of our body. Like you said, the devices are coming closer to our body, or even in the future, very soon, will be fully integrated into our body. Like, what are your thoughts on like the user experience, having Apple hardware like attached to your face? Like, do you feel like there's like a safety or ethics concern?
Yeah, I think I feel a lot of things, but I think the main takeaway is that it just is. This is where technology has reached, and given that,
Okay.
what are we going to do about it? Are we kind of going to wholeheartedly embrace it and bring it into our homes? I think because it's Apple, the answer could be yes. I think people, if they have the opportunity to interact with past photos, like live photos or videos, and feel like they're present there, um, might opt to, in fact, do that. After trying out the Apple Vision Pro, my first thought was, oh my God, this is so scary and terrifying. I don't think I'm going to be an early adopter.
Yeah.
But I have another appointment booked at the Apple store close to me because I was like, I just need to experience that again.
Okay. You don't go to the Carnegie Library, do you?
I have visited there. I'm
Yeah.
actually all over, I'm in Philly right now. So
Oh,
kind of
you are? I hate
that's
that Apple store, by the way.
oh,
Uh, it's beautiful, but I don't go to the Apple store to buy Apple hardware. We have an awesome one here in Chicago that's right on the river
mhm.
across from the Trump Tower. It's the one like you see in Manhattan where it's like the glass ball. But
Right.
instead of that just being a glass ball and then everything's underground, it like extends, this like large glass extends close to the river.
Oh,
So
that must
it
be
gets
beautiful.
it gets beautiful sunlight, and they always have the most beautiful stores. I just hate shopping with them.
Yeah.
Uh, so actually, I always, if I order from the Apple store, I do delivery.
Oh, really?
I've
Oh,
had them deliver MacBooks.
huh.
They bring it in a nice bag, and it's like $4, and you can do it on the device, and it's next day or sometimes same day.
That's
It's
pretty
really
cool.
amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, but then I get my phone from Verizon because it's like impossible to do a phone upgrade with
Yeah.
Apple.
Yeah.
Uh, so like when I was thinking about the like wave of advanced economies, I'm depressed now because remember I'm more techno pessimistic than you are, because where I know, I'm sorry, don't judge, but where I'm seeing a need for advancements is like I don't think state actors are going to temper the security competition, and there are some states that are gaining technological advantages with UAVs and
Mhm.
drones, and then it's leaving soldiers defenseless. And so, like, where I've been shifted my thoughts was back to some of the like more primitive parts of human nature around war. So I left this like optimistic, like there's going to be like this massive personal integration. And I've been thinking more about technological application, artificial intelligence, and how that's being applied in war or not being applied. And uh, and then I noticed that soldiers are still marching, and so these things really seriously distracted some of the more like optimistic ways that I was thinking about technology. But at the time, Bology had just put the network state out.
Hmm.
Did you read that?
I haven't. I've read many reviews on it, but I haven't
Okay.
read the book. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think he's missing like some of the things that you talk about.
Hmm.
I think it's like very like crypto and Web3 focused. And but he's trying to like get people to kind of launch themselves beyond national boundaries
Hmm.
using digital currency and Web3 type applications. Whereas, like, my thought is like, I hear you more talking about like, we're here on Earth. What can the technology do for us here? I think that maybe ties into like your background or like why you're an optimist. I mean, could you share anything on that?
Yeah, so it sounds like the question is, why do you continue to believe in the benefit of technology,
Not
maybe?
in a negative way, though. Not in a dissenting way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a good question. I think part of it, and I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but is if you look at the outcomes of science and progress and innovation, they tend to have pretty good outcomes. For example, the invention of Velcro came about because of space research and exploration. Um, and I think for every dollar spent on space exploration, it returns something like 15 back in terms of GDP,
Oh wow.
just from the inventions that trickled out of it. Don't quote me on this. This is
Yeah.
from something around in 2021. But it seems like science and technology and progress in general have good outcomes in terms of human health and scientific progress, and just making lives better for us overall, which I think
Sure.
is fundamentally the reason why I continue to believe that us gaining knowledge about how things work is good. Um, Whether or not, or I guess the ways in which we should act on what we know, I think we need to do some more reflecting on. And this is, I guess, kind of ethereal. The way I'm building this thesis is just through various facts that we have about the state of the world currently. So, for example, Americans spend something like 30% less time uh, volunteering or going to things like community events,
Mm.
or even church or religious services. Uh, Over the last 20 years, that's decreased by 30%.
Jeez.
There are similar statistics that show that people are just getting lonelier, um, and spending more time indoors. I'm sure the pandemic accelerated that, but that seemed to be a trend over the last decade or a couple of decades. And
Sure.
so you begin to ask why that might be the case. And there was a philosopher that said, like, he was explaining relationships, and he said that people who are kind of in a romantic relationship, their worldview is looking at each other. For friends, it's about looking at the world together.
Mm.
So having a view of a common world. And
Sure.
what happens is we continue to build in virtual spaces or create those virtual spaces that people spend their time in, is that we lose um, the ability to look at something together and therefore the shared experience to see the same thing and have the same experience.
Mm.
So I just think hyper customization is going to lead to that degree of solipsism, or just like living alone in your own world and heighten the sense of loneliness. And my developing thesis around that is, just like Apple or any other big company scaffolded your entry into digital worlds by teaching you
Okay.
how to use features one at a time, I think we're going to have to do that same coaching to bring people back out into the physical world and say, here are events you can go to, here are ways to socialize, and kind of embed a degree of collectivism
Mm.
into American society, or just societies overall, to encourage people
Yeah.
to embrace togetherness.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's probably like some connection between like the emergence of personal devices and uh, fracturing of identity. We know the like academics were able to divide it and create subcategories which have been enriching in certain disciplines and less informative in other disciplines, but in the least, these identities correlate with clusters of language, and these clusters of language are distributed on these information systems. Uh, and so it's like you're saying, this loneliness is really people are identifying with the world that they're experiencing digitally, which still has like billions of, well, hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of real people. Uh, but like this, like it's very detached. Uh, like it's like, can a person make meaning on a computer system and without ever interacting with society? And we're finding like it's not safe, and it's actually it's like unhealthy. The method you described to kind of retrain people is fascinating.
Yeah, and the reason I haven't released it out into the world in terms of any form of real writing is because I'm not sure if it needs to be as clinical as that, in terms of like measuring or like workshopping how we can roll things out to get people out again. I think that can happen a lot more organically. I think we just need to create systems that encourage that.
But now you wrote a piece called "What We Will Have Achieved by 2100." So you ain't playing any games. You're projecting the future, which means that you're actively working to shape it.
Yes, that was heavily caveated with it. This is just a playful, because I threw around
That's
a
how it
lot.
always starts. That's how, yeah, it's play. And then next thing you know, you're defining the future to 2100 and everyone's listening to you. So, what were you thinking about through the kind of play exercise projecting the future 70 years from now or so?
Some of the things that stood out, I guess one was just a system of inframing the world, or an attitude that people could adopt as we move forward. You have Aristotle, who describes technology as the coming forth of something or the creation of something, or techne. And then later on, you have Heidegger describe this as technology turning into something that exploits humans and uses a system of calculative thinking just to get things done. And I think as we continue to build on what our predecessors have built upon, we continue to move further and further down the quantification and calculative thinking route. And so I think that's just a helpful way of taking a step back and understanding how one might view the world in which we live today. And I think the context for that commentary was, I think there will be a return to nature where we start to appreciate the natural environment that we live in a lot more. And part of the reasoning is because we stop viewing um, humans and natural resources as things to be exploited to create more up level things, but start to kind of return to base and protect the elements that we have.
That's fascinating. And you talked about two ideological camps too, the transhumanist and the posthumanist.
Yeah, the thinking there was, again, this is a more futuristic kind of fictional view, but
Yeah.
more that two philosophical camps could pop up around either advancing forms of humans or advancing forms of machines. And so, would you invest in posthumanism and advancing the species that comes after humans, or transhumanism, which means actually augmenting humans as you have today? I guess what an instance of that looks like is, you've probably heard of Brian Johnson's blueprint.
Sure.
What he's doing is mapping out his biomarkers to understand how his body is functioning at a very granular level, and then trying to hyper optimize each biomarker so that he lives forever.
That's
And then he's
interesting.
trying to package that into a product and say, like, here are the supplements that are working for each of these biomarkers, and here's why you should use them. I mean, you can live forever. So that's one maybe instance of what augmenting humans or transhumanism could look like, versus
Yeah.
posthumanism is saying maybe something closer to what OpenAI is trying to do, like realize AGI, and how we can truly push
Yeah.
the bounds of just like a global form of intelligence.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I Do you think that like futurists are like mostly godless, atheist, technology obsessed? Or, I mean, because like things that, one of the things that I worry about is that people are already being overly influenced by technology, which means that they're being influenced by political actors, political entrepreneurs, corporate actors, interest groups, which used to just be contained to some part of the radio and a small part of television, but now it's around us 24/7. Uh, so, like in some ways, I think that the idea of AGI is propaganda and also like a rhetorical tactic for generating more cash for scientific research and more capital for building new technologies. Again, it's because I'm a little more pessimistic. But do you think AGI is a real thing or like a real possibility? What are your thoughts? Because look, the reason I ask you is because you changed my mind on like some technology stuff that's completely reshaped my thinking in certain areas seriously. So like if you think that AGI is legit, I would understand that it's rigorous thinking that went behind your perspective. It might change later, but I'm
Yeah,
just wondering. Like I'm interested to know if you think AGI is legit or feasible or
yeah.
possible or
Um,
anything.
Great question. And I only smile because it's such a big question these days, especially as the Overton window has shifted towards policymakers and really everyone having the conversation around whether superintelligence could be a thing.
Okay,
And yeah, very humble to hear that I have changed your mind on certain tech
for
related
sure.
things. But uh, yeah, I would say that initially it was hard for me to grasp how AGI could function, just applying like a very technical lens and saying like,
Mhm.
Okay, if you're providing certain inputs and training it on certain data, that should restrict the scope of what a model is able to output or learn. um,
Mhm.
However, as I hear more and just see the results of certain types of algorithms, it's becoming clear that models that previously relied more on training are now able to become more reliant on the inferences they're making from the training data, and therefore less reliant on the data itself. So, whereas initially they might have required 80% of training to be able to make 20% of the inferences, now they're able to go off of 50% of that original training set to make 50% inferences. That stat is just from a talk that a Microsoft researcher gave recently. But it was scary to hear just in terms of at the very base level of research, people are discovering these things. And so we are moving from training to inference. Um,
Yeah,
the meta conclusion of that being, yes, it can expand beyond the scope of what it is trained to do potentially. I'm
yeah,
not an AI expert, and so would have to learn more, but it seems
sure,
that way.
sure. Okay, here's another question. And you obviously don't have to make an official announcement, but
Uh-huh.
when are you going to build something? I'm like anxiously anticipating that you're going to be building something. And is it software, hardware, software and hardware? I mean,
Great question. I'm not sure. So I think when we spoke last, I was working in consulting, pretty generalist role, just really learning, absorbing, understanding how things worked. Um, I've now, for the next couple of months, have joined Avataar.ai. They're a startup working on um, virtual VR, AR, retail kind of stuff. So
oh,
bringing
cool.
immersive 3D experiences to retailers and then transforming just like the online shopping experience. I think they're
Yeah,
doing really cool things with their technology and have made a ton of breakthroughs. And so excited to be supporting the team.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and yes, I think I would eventually like to start something. I think um, I and other to be founders or would be founders often get caught up in the question of what to work on, like what the
Yeah.
highest impact thing might be or where your skills might be best applied. And I think what I've learned is just to run at something, and it doesn't matter if it's necessarily the most efficient or the biggest or the flashiest thing.
Okay.
Just start working on it and then pivot and keep pivoting till something sticks. But that's kind of the mindset I'm using. Yeah, really excited to be at Avtar. I think they're going to do amazing things.
Yeah, that's freaking awesome. Anything else that has been on your mind, technologically, philosophically, neurologically,
Yeah, I would
societally?
societally. Yeah, no, I would say the biggest thing I'm thinking about is definitely our gradual shift to virtual spaces. And then also the impact that increasingly embedded technology is going to have on our cognitive function. So, for example, as we continue to interact with more immersive technology, we also have to make more micro decisions about maybe which word to read as we're in
Oh,
a
yeah,
technological space or which sentence it makes most sense to pay attention to. Um,
sure.
I think that mechanism of attention selecting is actually impacting our ability to attention regulate in
Mm,
real life and outside spaces. And so it's like when I'm scrolling through Twitter, I'll pay attention to maybe 20% of what I encounter on my feed, which is a great way to deal with an overabundance of stimulus in a virtual space. However,
sure.
then when I exit out and go into the real world, I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to filter out 80% of what I'm seeing or encountering and only paying attention to 20%.
Wow.
And that has devastating consequences on my ability to pay attention to something.
Yeah.
Um, I'd be interested in testing whether that's actually a thing. And as we get more multimodal in how we interact with digital interfaces, how that's
Mhm.
going to transform our cognitive function in the real world. I think it, I think about this because there are products coming out. There's this one reader that allows you to wear a headset on your head to read a book, and that's the only use case. And I think it's amazing. They're like building around how your cognitive systems have adapted to encourage you to read and rediscover the value of literature. But at the same time, I worry for future generations who might have to buy a product to be able to read. And so
Oh
it's just,
goodness.
I think, worth understanding why this might be the case, why we're seeing these effects.
Okay. And you always communicate so well, but I can tell that you see a broader picture that also includes market dynamics and business, right? But it's behind the artistic side of you.
That's
Uh,
very kind. I mean, I hope
yeah,
so. I think like I
yeah,
practically would approach this as a startup person, though I've never
yeah,
founded anything of my own.
sure.
And then secondarily, like to think about the direction in which all this is going. So kind of like an is-ought framework.
That's fair. And also, just so you know, I don't know if you noticed, but Rune on Twitter,
Mhm.
that's Sam Altman. And I hope that he admits that on Lex Friedman's podcast. I sent a message to Lex. So just so you know, Sam Altman follows us on his alt. Maybe he could, like, just do that on his real account.
Mm.
And talk about a character for embedding himself into like Twitter counterculture and AI land.
Yeah,
Uh,
I actually think it's you joke about this, but I've seen that like people will now send their like virtual avatars or note takers into meetings
oh, yeah.
to attend the meeting on their behalf, and it's so
Yes.
efficient, but I don't know. It's interesting.
Somebody did that to one of my meetings that's very sensitive and has implications if the information isn't rolled out in a particular order. I was like, oh my God, they just literally created like the worst data privacy and security risk for my entity, which I'll tell you about soon. But then it like sent the summary to every single person on the invite, not just the attendees. And I'm like, I feel like I need to calculate for that because that's like unexpected but interesting. So do you
Yeah.
think people are just going to keep sending their AI assistants and then it'll just be AI assistant to AI assistant?
Well, I think that's what Facebook and Zuckerberg envision for the future of meetings and creators. I think something Zuck stated was he wanted creators to have assistants to be able to, or sorry, virtual avatars or versions of themselves
Yeah.
powered by AI to be able to interact with their fans so they can actually make money off of the meetings that they do or cameos that they do without being physically present. And I think you can now also add AIs to your group chats to help
Yeah.
synthesize information. And so we're definitely like
I don't like it.
anthropomorphizing
I
these
don't like it.
algorithms.
But I'll be hopeful because you've given me some good reasons to think more optimistically. And next time we talk, if it doesn't make you too depressed, we should talk through some of the more dystopic ways or pessimistic ways of thinking about tech that are as relevant, but uh, and also have solutions
Mhm.
that sets that can come up within them. But it'll be a cool contrast. Anyways, it's amazing to host you, and I'm going to link your Twitter and your Substack and your
Perfect.
cool website. So
Oh, thank you so much. That needs updating, but that would be amazing. Thank you.